Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Stuart MacDonald. I'm the editor of Inside Housing, and I'd like to welcome you all to this webinar debate with the two candidates to be the next president of the Chartered Institute of Housing. We're going to hear from Paul Tennant, who's the Chief Executive of Orbit Housing Group, and firstly housing consultant Jan Taranchuk, as to why they feel they are the best person for the job. More importantly, this is also the opportunity for you to quiz them on why they deserve the votes of CIH members by the deadline of the 30th of January. So please make sure you get your questions in and don't be shy. So before we get started, I just wanted to say a quick few words about webinars and how you can get the most out of today. I know many of you will have attended a webinar before, but please bear with me for a moment for those of you who have not. This works pretty much like any face-to-face seminar you might have been to. We're going to hear from Jan and then Paul for no more than 3 minutes each as they set out their pitches. There's going to be plenty of time for debate and questions at the end. Now, to ask a question, you need to use the Q&A box on the bottom right-hand side of the screen. You can see that Steve Scholar's already done that. Steve, thank you for that. Just so you know, you can hear us, but we can't hear you, I'm afraid. So please don't try to shout your question out. Now, your typed question will only be seen by the panelists until it's answered, and then it will be seen by everybody else. So we'll try and make sure where we can that we get some responses to them, either in writing or verbally, as we go through the debate. You can post a question at any time, and as I say, I'll do my best to get through all the questions during the half hour that we have. At the end, you can also download a transcript of the Q&A box if you want, and it would also be great if you could take a quick moment to complete the feedback form for the session, as this will make sure we iron out any problems for next time. Okay, that's it. I think let's get cracking. We've been running an online poll for the past week or so on insidehousing.co.uk, and there's been over 400 of you voted in that, and Jan is just edging ahead on 51% when I last checked about an hour or so ago. So it's all very much still to play for. So I think without further ado, let's turn to our first speaker, Jan Taranchuk. Jan, 3 minutes starts now.
Stuart, hi. Thank you very much. I think all I need to say is that having been in housing for a little while and been involved in the Chartered Institute of Housing I look back, in fact, I became an associate back in 1988, been working with the London branch for a long time, and I think and I know that the Institute is an important part of life within the housing profession. And the experience I've had across ALMOs, housing associations, local authorities, I retired from Greenwich back in 1999, been in the private sector ever since, working with a range of authorities across the country and housing organisations. I enjoy being in housing, and I enjoy working with people in housing, and I think the way that the Institute has gone in recent years, under the leadership of Sarah Webb, sadly who died, as we know, in September, the changes that we've got bringing forward will mean that the Institute is more accountable to its members, and I'm really keen about this. And whilst obviously I would like people to vote for me, I'm really keen that people take the opportunity to vote in this election, because about 13,000 people have had the chance to vote for the first time, and they will have to make choices based on what Paul and I have said on the CIH website. So from my point of view, and I'm not going to need the full 3 minutes, Stuart. Well, from my point of view, if people want a vice president leading on to a president who's going to work closely with the management board, work closely with the chief exec when the new chief exec is appointed, work closely with the president, and want somebody who's prepared to listen and lead, to challenge, to be different, and to encourage other people to get involved in the Institute, then, as they say, I'm your person. Thank you.
Okay, Jan, short and very succinct. Thank you very much for that. Paul, I'll hand over to you.
Similar trends, I suppose, similar issues. There's 2 or 3 things I draw attention to, though, I think. I got the job description and the role and went through it in a fair amount of detail because I wanted to make sure that I would be the right person for the job. I think I am for a number of reasons. Firstly, I've come through the ranks, so therefore I started collecting rent in 1982, and I've worked my way through, and I joined the Institute at the same time. I worked my way through the qualification through to 85, and then used that to move around into different jobs and worked up to the Chief Exec's job today. So I understand the issues having been a member, and I've got the experience and to a degree the scars on my back of having worked my way through the sector. I think in terms of the current situation, in my view, I understand the roles required of organisations. I understand the issues that the sector is currently facing. And similar to Jan, I've got a huge passion for what we do. I believe completely in what we're about as organisations, as in a sector, and linking that to a belief in what the CIH exists to do as well. I have made a point of talking to a wide range of members, attended regional committees, and clearly what's coming back from members is a huge desire to engage, to see the profession work for them and develop their skill sets and enable them to be part of the huge change programme that's going ahead. So again, similar message, I understand the issues. I make a point of working closely with people in the sector. I do listen, and I heard some really interesting views and thoughts. And what struck me is a huge appetite for engagement with the CIH, and that's a huge resource for us to make use of, both in terms of the individual, but also in terms of the sector's impact around society and the type of thing we do going forward. And I think in terms of my personal qualities, in terms of leadership, I lead a large organisation. I understand the issues around leadership. I work closely with boards and have done for a number of years, and would do exactly the same situation with the governing board. So I'm hoping that my three offers would be, I've come through the ranks of the CIH, I understand the sector, but I think importantly I do have a vision for the future, and I hope and would like to be part of developing the CIH's future alongside that.
Okay, both of you, thank you very much for that. Okay, we've got a couple of questions coming through already, but I think before we get into that, I just wanted to just ask both of you really, what do you expect is going to be the biggest challenge facing the housing sector and the CIH in the coming 2 years? And you know, how would you address that if you're successful? We'll go to Paul first on that if we can.
Separate out those two issues just to begin with and then blend them back together again. I think in terms of the sector, then it seems to me the welfare reform bill and the new business model for organisations are going to be key, because we exist to support individuals and help people. On the other hand, we also exist to provide homes and build communities for people. I think both of those are going to be significant challenges. One in terms of the direct impact on people, and the other in terms of how you do start to produce houses, potentially after 2015. I think in terms of the CIH, linked to that, there's a couple of issues. One is about making sure that we develop and present our influence to inform that agenda, particularly around welfare reform. I think how we innovate in terms of bringing through new thinking so that we can change and adapt our business models going forward. But I think a key element underpinning that is how the CIH works with members to enable them to be successful in this future. When I spoke to members over the last couple of weeks, one of the key things for them is, how is the CIH going to help me and help my communities to adapt to the new environment? And what they're really seeking is that support and enabling to come through the CIH. That is a challenge, I think, for the CIH, but one it's more than able to do, and also a very exciting opportunity for CIH.
Do you think, Paul, before I come to Jan, do you think that the CIH is doing everything it can now? I mean, because obviously, essentially, you think there could be something that's done differently?
Well, what I'm reflecting back are conversations I had with members. So these aren't necessarily my views. This is what the members are saying to me. And it seems to me people are very keen that the CIH works with them to do more, to engage, to develop the relationship they have now further. And I think that is a huge opportunity. I think people want to have a very clear communication structure. They want to know how they can engage with the CIH and help design and develop the CIH. And a number of people have raised that with me. I think it's a challenge, but all organisations can be better. Nobody's perfect, so therefore the opportunity to build and develop is there.
Okay, Paul, thank you for that. Jan, same question to you, just about what do you see as the key challenge facing the housing sector and the CIH in the coming years, and how would you address that if you were successful in your candidacy?
Remembering, as Paul had talked about the role profile, the important part to remember is that the President works closely with the managing board of the CIH and won't be, if you like, a voice on his or her own, so that's important. Challenges are around affordability, are around supply, and indeed are around, welfare reform links to affordability. And also linking back to the relevance of the CIH to members, because whilst we have a very strong regional structure, both within England and across the UK, What we still have is a disjoint, as we always have in any large organisation, between the people who I would call activists within the organisation and people doing the day-to-day job. So the challenge for us is to be the voice and to work closely with our members, but to get more members, to get more people involved within the CIH, because quite clearly, at the moment, the figures, you'll know your own circulation figures for Inside Housing, Stuart. I think they're about, you claim, I think, a readership of about 88,000 people. But the CIH has only got a membership of 22,000 people. So already there is a gap between the people who see membership of the CIH as relevant and people who are interested in housing from a readership point of view. So for the future, I think, working closely with the regional committees and the boards, finding a way to reach those people in the communities who are involved in housing and who themselves are affected by the financial circumstances in which we find ourselves. It's not as though members of the CIH are aloof from the housing crisis. They are part of it themselves. So there will be people who are working for us and with us who are on waiting lists, who can't afford the so-called affordable rents. So linking those two aspects very closely, I think, will be a real challenge for the organisation. Real challenge.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, and I'm just picking up the questions from Steve Scholar here. It's been posted on the site. He's asking, he's not a member of the CIH, but obviously he's a housing practitioner. He's just asking, you know, what would you do, just going on from that point about existing members of the CIH, what would you do to try and be attracting people who work in the sector? Your point, I suppose, there, Jan, but who are not currently members of the CIH. What would your offer to them be?
Well, I think the discussion with the managing board and with the regional committees, and this may already have begun within the review within the CIH that I haven't perhaps kept up to date with, but I know is important to everybody, is about value for money. It's people believing that the fee for being a member gives them what they want. And in Steve's case, the issue around leasehold management for many years has been kind of seen as on the edge of the social housing sector, but it clearly has grown in importance. It's grown in importance with shared ownership and the importance to get service charges and the whole relationship between people who have now invested in their homes and are invested in the communities in which they live. And originally, I think, local authorities, people in social housing, certainly back in the 80s when Right to Buy kicked off, we hadn't got it right. But organisations now like Wandsworth, who now have 17,000 leaseholders, are doing much better for the leaseholders. So from the Institute's point of view, we have to put together a series of, I hate the word offer, but that's what it's going to be, to convince young Stevie that he should be a member of this very large family of housing practitioners who want to share good practice and share knowledge, which he won't necessarily get if he's out there on his own.
Okay, well, thanks, Simon. Paul, do you agree? I mean, Jan's been quite clear that one of his priorities would be to try to expand the membership base of the Institute. I mean, is that something that you'd be looking to try and do as well? And if so, how?
There's two things on the membership base. One, I think we should extend the membership base, because what we want to try and do is to have more people who work in the profession linked to the CIH. But I think that's partly about how the CIH opens itself up and is accessible. I think the other thing also is about how we then link to other professional bodies, RICS and others, because I think there's a way of trying to get other people who speak on behalf of housing and get a broader church speaking up on the issues that we present. But going back to Steve's particular point, I suppose I'm concerned about his view that there's an indifference. I've been involved in leasehold management for years, and I've done a lot of schemes where we work with leaseholders. I worked for McCarthy and Stone previously. I also have leasehold in our current organisation. What I've seen over the years is a two-way process where at times leasehold is seen to be outside of housing, but actually in many ways my experience that we've learned a lot from leasehold because of the different approach to customers and how they've approached the service. So I think for me it'd be a two-way process, partly about the offer to Steve, but also we can also bring into the CIH generally and into the profession about other ways of approaching things, other service offers, how people approach at different cultures. It is not a one-way process for me, because in my view, if a member joins, we also bring their brain with them, and we want to make best use of that. We want to learn from them. It's not just about, there you go, we give to you. It's more about, well, actually you also bring value to us. So I'd want a member to feel valued because we give them something, but actually part of what we're about, and they make us better by bringing in another skill set. And my experience with leasehold is that in many ways, social housing, we've learned a lot from leasehold management over the years.
Yeah. Okay. No, thank you for that, Paul. I'm just conscious of time. I think we need to move on. There's another question here from William Shortall asking about the welfare reform bill. I think we can't have a discussion about the challenges facing the housing sector going forward. You've both already mentioned the welfare reform, but I'm just wondering. I mean, just maybe a quick one-word answer from each of you in this to start with. And maybe Paul, you can answer this first. I mean, are you in favour of the principle of welfare reform?
Yes.
Okay, Jan, to you.
Yes.
Okay, fine. So let me go into the details, and Paul, I'll come to you in this first. I mean, to what extent do you agree with the direction the government's going in so far? Because obviously this is a UK-wide issue. I mean, you've got the £26,000 cap of benefits. I mean, is that something you support?
I think there's an issue here about how that's presented. 26,000 is a large number. How much of that people actually see is again a debate. There's a lot of heat going on about this conversation at the moment. I think for me, it's about having a fair and equitable system. And if reform is needed, which I think it is, then I think it's got to be done in a humane way. So it's how it's worked through, the implications on individuals, recognising the potential implications of people having to move. There's a lot of complete opposite views currently about whether the situation with the private sector is actually increasing the welfare bill. Because I think the reforms that we're talking about, something like £290 million changes out of a £192 billion budget. So it's a small amount in the overall budget, but I think it's about how that is then dealt with those individuals involved. As ever, CIH and our job, we deal with people often who are very vulnerable. I think it's about how we try and help those people to gain opportunity. But conversation about, well, people can move on to jobs. If the jobs aren't there, I think that there's no point trying to say to people, you can move on to something else. We have seen, and we will see, people having to move. That causes a huge amount of upheaval for people, particularly around children who are at school. So I think it's about the implications for people. Everybody would accept that we need to control any form of welfare costs. But the reason we have a welfare system in this country is to help people.
Okay, no, thank you for that, Paul. It's a difficult bit, since you're saying you would back the government in terms of what it's trying to do, but focus on the transitional arrangements to help people in terms of making that move. But you also sort of feel that the system exists to help people, but you do need to control what's spent in it. Is that a fair summary of your position?
I think it is, yes.
Okay, fine. Yeah, and what's your take on this? I mean, are you kind of in agreement with Paul on this, or do you have a different view?
I think all sensible housing professionals have got the same take, because we can see the impact, and it's the impact that is the issue here. And the debate currently going on in the Lords has started because there are serious people who can see the impact of those proposals, and they are making the point to government that you can't just impose changes across the country that have different effects across the country. And now, whilst we don't have a regional housing benefit system, the reality is that there is a very stark difference between costs of housing in different parts of the country. And Paul's point about understanding how that impacts on people is what has to be understood before any changes can be implemented. And that, I think, that's the point.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you for that. I think we could go on about the welfare side of things for the rest of the time we have, but I think maybe best we can pick up on that again if we need to through some of the questions. I'm aware there's an under occupancy question there, but I think I want to move on to a couple of other areas first if we can. I'm just thinking about security of tenure, if we can pick up on that. I'm aware this is an issue just for England, but we'll touch on some of the wider UK issues in a moment, if that's all right. But just coming to you, Jan, you were saying on our website last week that you're against the use of short-term tenancies in general needs housing, but what about the obvious benefits that you get from short-term tenancies in terms of allowing them to manage, allowing landlords to manage more difficult tenants, reassess people's circumstances to ensure they're appropriately housed? If you have a short-term tenancy in place, then why would you not sort of think that would be a good thing to have?
I don't agree with your description of obvious benefits of, because those implications of housing management exist already. The ability to manage tenancies that are causing a difficulty to the landlord, those toolkits already exist for housing managers. Both Paul and I have already said that we agree on the fact that you can't have stable communities with instability being built into it. And going into a new tenancy, quite often somebody, a family who's never had a social tenancy, had any kind of tenancy before, there needs to be stability to allow people to progress. And the whole point about the welfare reform stuff, about people progressing in their home and then making progress within the community is very difficult to do if at the end of the piece of paper it says, and at the end of 3 years or 4 years or 5 years we might come along and do something to you.
Okay, so to what extent, sorry to interrupt, but I'm just conscious of to what extent, if you were successful in your vice presidential and obviously presidential role, I mean, to what extent would you then, because obviously the Localism Act's gone through now, but to what extent would you be using your position to try to encourage CIH members to not to kind of to use 2-year or 5-year tenancies?
I actually don't think that's the role of the president. Each local authority and each landlord will make their own decisions based on what they believe are the issues within their own area.
Okay, all right.
It'll be for housing managers to then implement the policies try and influence them before they're made, and then implement them afterwards.
Okay, all right, thank you for that. And Paul, your position, I mean, it's slightly different to that. Obviously, at Orbit, I think you're looking at implementing 5-year tenancies. But I'm just wondering on that. I mean, how can somebody, and you say people need to feel secure in their home, but how can someone feel secure when they no longer have a tenancy for life? How does that work?
Well, I think what we're trying to do here is to make best use of what is still a scarce resource. I think after we had the conversation about tenancies, I added the point that my view is still that we have too few homes. I think that is a fundamental issue. What we're trying to do is to manage realistically and pragmatically what we do have. The reason we went as an organisation for a minimum of 5 is because we don't agree with the 2 years, which I think just constantly creates turmoil for people. 5 years, I think, does allow people's potentially situations in their life to have changed in many ways. I think it's then offering people options and choices about potential other tenure choices, other types of opportunity, creating mobility within the tenancy base. So for me, it's about just making best use of that resource and trying to encourage people to develop other options and solutions, because
how do you respond to Jan's point, though? Sorry to interrupt. How do you respond to Jan's point that he feels that you can do that stuff already without sort of altering somebody's length of tenure?
Well, I think my view is that with a scarce resource, and certainly we've seen this in some cases talking to individual residents, unless there was an issue which prompted them to have a conversation or to consider other options, then those other options just don't get onto the table for them. So I think what we're trying to do is to make sure that people recognise that we will sustain them, we'll actively manage their tenancies. The tenancies can be renewed. Again, it's not a case of saying 5 years and out. I think it's that point about having that flexibility over what is a very scarce resource and to work with people. One of the things I think we often do is almost warehouse people. I think the issue here is that as an active manager with a stock base, talking to our staff, talking to our residents, that type of active approach to make best use of a scarce resource, most people accept that. I think it's about how it's then done and not imposed on people about, well, you're going to have to move. It's just an approach where you make best use of the resource.
Okay. All right. I'm just looking at some of the questions that have come through, and let's take this north of the border for a minute. We've got a question from Julia Malloy asking about, how the successful candidate will look at supporting Scottish CIH members to prepare for the new regulatory environment in Scotland. Obviously, there's been some big changes there. I mean, it'd be good if you can both answer that. I'll come to you first on that, Paul, but also be quite nice if, as part of this answer, you could both think about what were your messages to to members of the CIH, obviously not just in England, but in the other parts of the UK, and also further afield. Obviously, there's large memberships elsewhere for the CIH. So what would so if we can answer the specific point about regulatory change in Scotland, and then perhaps a general comment about your approach to the wider membership base outside of England.
I think in terms of the regulation in Scotland, I met with the regulator when we spoke at an event together in Ireland a few months ago, and it was interesting understanding their approach to regulation. There is a huge amount of change there, but I think what struck me was that it was a very practical approach. It is very much about still around the consumer. It's less about the financial viability, and I think that was perceived to be a really strong offer. So I think there was a lot of opportunity to share between what's going on in England and in Scotland, but what they really valued was that ability to keep a view to the consumer and to develop that thinking further. And I can fully understand why they're going down that route. I think in terms of the support that you would give through the CIH, talking to colleagues, I think there's quite a robust structure in Scotland for the CIH, and I think there's a view that people have more involvement in what goes on and how the CIH operates in Scotland. I think I just want to be seen to support that. I think it would be one of those things, again, of going out to see people, talk to people, understand and engage, because you can do things by phone, you can do things by electronics, but there's nothing better than actually talking to people and having a conversation about what people want, how they perceive the relationship. And I see the vice presidency, the ambassadorial bit, as part of getting out and meeting people and starting to make sure that the views and thoughts actually ripple back into, and as well as listening to you, what we heard is, and then adapt the organisation to reflect that. And I think, again, that's hopefully a strength that can bring the ability to listen and then do something about things. So I think the engagement would be building on what's currently there and being accessible.
Okay, all right. I mean, and that presumably applies to your wider comment to the rest of the membership, yes?
Well, I think, again, the wider membership, I think that's where, again, I suppose in these times where funding is difficult, then significant overseas travel, you would use social media and you would use other methods of communication. And I think at the moment, the type of thing we're doing here, the type of thing that we do as an organisation, we see people virtually on a very regular basis. I think, again, it's that visibility, accessibility, and developing a relationship with people across the waters. There's no reason why that can't be done. And again, same point, it's about being accessible, it's about listening to what people say, hearing it, and then doing something about it.
Okay, as we're doing now through the webinar, exactly. So this is obviously a great illustration of that. Yeah, and same question to you about the first point, obviously being about the Scottish regulatory changes there, and what you might, what your priorities might be in that regard, and also just a wider point about, what your message would be to the wider CIH membership outside of England.
Okay, let me do the last bit first, because I think it's important that in going through this process that Paul and I are going, it is only for UK members, and what we've got to do in the Institute is to arrange and to ensure that the Constitution allows people outside of the UK to vote in future elections. That's really the most important thing, because there is the engagement thing just isn't there at the moment. That's the first thing. The second thing, across Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales, I agree with Paul. The engagement of members in Scotland, I think, is much closer, and I think it's partly to do with the fact that both in Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, there's a better relationship between the profession and the government, in that both in Scotland the toing and froing over the regulator and the plans have been much more, well, in fact, to be fair, the new version that's out from the Scottish Government have taken into account considerably the details that were put forward by the CIH Scotland. So the new plans that are being put forward very much reflect what CIH Scotland has been saying to the government. A much closer working relationship between the two, and the same as in Wales, where the Welsh Assembly is listening to the CIH Cymru in a much better way than I think than the relationship we have in England. And the lesson learnt, picking up on Paul's point, the lesson learnt there is that when the CIH as a profession works closely with the government of the day for that particular part of the UK, I think everybody benefits.
But it's not from bringing that back to England, if we can. And thank you for that. I mean, obviously, it's not for want of trying in terms of the English context that housing professionals, maybe have not had the degree of influence that as you've just described, as happens elsewhere in the UK. So, what would then put us to you first, Jan? What would you do differently to try and help the sector punch its weight in the political arena?
Well, it comes back to that. I mean, I said it before, and I say it again. That interview that day that Carla Keegan's had with the minister, I think, was very illuminating. And the apparent degree of distrust that exists at a political level with us as a profession, we have to collectively work to deal with that. And if by having being seen as being critical and not kind of taking our view as a critique, that I think is the issue for the politicians. We as professionals will deal with whoever is in government, and ultimately we all want the same thing. We want to, I believe that that's what current government wants, the same as we do.
Why is there a distrust though? Why do you think there's a distrust where there isn't in other parts of the UK?
Well, I have to say that both in Scotland and in Wales, I think there has always been a closer working relationship I hate the term regional, but on a regional basis. We perhaps are geographically or mentally further apart, or seen as further apart. And I don't know the reason for that, but I think the distrust has always, the distrust between politicians and housing professionals it's not new. People need to get to know each other. I would like to think that as the existing minister gets to know us as an organisation better, that distrust will become less.
Okay, but there's no specific strategy you would have for trying to sort of say, what's happened has happened. That's water under the bridge. Here's what the things are now. Here's the new approach. Nothing specific you can say. This is what I would try and do differently.
I think the different thing is just trying to is getting across the point that within the housing profession we are trying to do the same as they are. And that we just have to, we need to continue. I used the word hammer, but that's probably not the right expression. We need to effectively get that point across to our politicians.
Okay, Paul, same question to you.
A couple of things on that one, really. I think I deal with ministers on a regular basis, and conversations with both in power and not. So we spoke to Jack Dromey 10 days ago. I don't think there's a distrust of the profession. My experience, particularly at the last conference in Harrogate, was the relationship between Grant Shapps and Sarah was exceptionally good. And I think he went out of his way to reinforce that point, that CIH, he listened to them, it influenced, it had an impact. So I don't think there is a distrust at all. I think our messages have been good, and I think we need to maintain that. I think in terms of what I would do differently, I think we need to have this broader church where we have more people who speak up for housing. This isn't just about self-interest. We make a huge difference to the health agenda. We make a huge difference to the environmental agenda. We make a huge difference to the economic agenda. There's a very, very broad offer that we bring to society as housing and as housing organisations. So I'd want to build on that, join with others. And I suppose if I was in a room with them, I'd want to emphasise what we do now, how we are changing and have changed to deal with the new agenda. We are not sitting on our hands as a sector or as individual members, nor as an institute. And I think the other thing is that we're up for the future, and we are seeing the future and starting to react to it now. So I think we should be pleased with what we've got, be proactive about how we present it, and actually drive the agenda because we have a huge offer to bring. And we just have to keep going back and back and back and reinforcing that message and arguably just demonstrate the real value we do bring.
And I think just picking up on that point,
okay, yeah,
Paul, is just to continue with, in fact, the last question that's on the panel. I think the opportunity in Manchester for Housing 2012 is enormous to do just that, because I think there was a good working relationship between Sarah and Grant, and I think we need to build on that relationship in order to, as Paul has said, demonstrates that the housing profession knows what it's doing.
Can I just call back on this one point also? It just crosses my mind. We do work with lobbyists as an organisation, and I do individually, and it's interesting hearing their play on us. And I think it's one of those things where, in many ways, as a sector, we often shoot ourselves in the foot for the simple thing about how we handle politicians. So it may not just be a pure point about government, it's about how we handle politicians in general. And that whole issue of housing, I suspect, hits, and I know, it hits their in-trays in the constituencies, huge numbers. My staff deal with that day in, day out, and I hear from the politicians. How you respond to that sends a message about you as a sector and you as an organisation and as an individual. And if you're prompt, you're effective, that's the feeling they get about us. So there's a range of things we can do, from simply answering their letters to giving them big infrastructural solutions to some of the big society problems that we have. We can cover all of those.
But I understand the point about orbit, but I mean, presumably from the CIH's point of view, obviously the CIH has, a strong and, a well-resourced policy unit, and obviously you would presumably expect that would be the means by which you'd be, influencing politicians, not paying lobbyists in addition to that. That's not what you're suggesting, is it?
No, I wasn't. I didn't suggest that the CIH. What I'm saying is, I hear from several sources the perception of housing. What I'm saying is that using that intelligence, we then go back. We do have a strong policy, but equally we've got 20,000 members who deal with politicians day in and day out. For me, one of the collective strengths of the CIH is its members. and their ability to talk to politicians, to influence politicians locally. Because if you influence 2 or 3 locally, that starts to build more of a collective understanding of what we offer and what we are. So I think the issue there for me is making sure that we hit it on both counts. The CIH as a policy organisation, but CIH members as individuals can make a huge difference in their communities and the conversations they have with the local politicians.
Okay, one final question, just on skill side of things. There's been a couple of things that have come through from individuals about kind of the focus that you might have on the skills within of professionals working in housing. I'm just wondering, you've both talked in recent weeks extensively about the role for the CIH in ensuring people have the skills they need to perform an evolving role, I suppose. We've touched on that today. I mean, just a couple of quick things I wanted to put to you. I mean, we did a skills survey in Inside Housing late last year, and it showed that about 60% of respondents felt their organisation did not have sufficient skills to meet the future challenges of what they saw as, the challenges coming down the line for their organisation. So I'm just wondering, I mean, how can the CIH help address that? And do you think what does it need to do differently? We'll go to Paul on that one first.
I think the key issue looking forward is leadership. I think what is coming out, certainly talking to members, talking to regional committees, I think this issue about leadership within organisations and leadership within communities is a key area that we need to be able to deal with in the future, because I think all of the experience tells us that as organisations develop going into challenging and changing times, then leadership is going to be a key characteristic. I think how we build people's ability to be leaders, so it's about competencies, it's about capability, it's about capacity, but it's also about culture of organisations, how they change and develop. Part of the issue is technical skills and technical development, but the other part also is about the people as individuals and how they fulfil their potential. For me, leadership is going to be absolute key as to how we drive our sector forward.
And do you see perhaps a kind of slight refocusing of how the CIH goes about or maybe perhaps promoting and the sorts of training it would be doing for people? Is that the sort of thing you're talking about?
Well, I think the CIH picks up on that issue currently. Again, talking to individuals, talking from my own perspective, we have built a relationship with the CIH because I wanted to see development, because talking to our staff in orbit, what we're hearing from people was it's about their development, their ability to move through the organisation in the future. Key issue is leadership. We've developed a relationship with the CIH, and many other organisations do have those strategic alliances. I think that's going to be hugely invaluable going forward. But there's also a case here for the CIH to show leadership by developing leadership, if you see what I mean. Because as well as leading the thinking within the sector, sitting alongside that, we need to have the staff who have got that capacity to lead those types of organisations, those types of communities. So for me, I think it's about how the CIH builds on what it's got, but really, really develops that message about the importance of leadership for organisations, but organisations are made up of individuals, and a lot of those individuals are CIH members.
Okay, yeah, I mean, same point to you.
And just briefly, because I agree with much of what actually Paul has said, but to have leadership, you need to have people who follow. And what we have to do is build on the frontline staff, because quite clearly that survey that was undertaken, there's an issue there about organisations, for whatever reason, deciding to perhaps to cut back on certain aspects of their expenditure and not seeing that they need to invest in their staff. And I think the CIH has a major role in talking to senior people within our organisations, RSL as well as local authorities, because the leadership within the local authorities at a strategic level is as important as leading the organisations that are delivering housing management on a day-to-day basis. The point about
the resources that you spend is a good one, but I think obviously, I mean, most landlords would say that they kind of have to sort of cut their cloth, and unfortunately, in a time of reduced resources, they're not able to sort of spend what they might like to. How would you convince them otherwise, as Vice President and President?
Well, we come back to the point that and I think both Paul and I have been saying this, in order to run housing organisations, you need housing managers. And there's a set of skills and a set of experience and a set of technical skills that are required. And we as an organisation have to invest in those people in order to get those skills identified and used in the right way. And with a number of organisations closing down housing courses because organisations are no longer prepared to send their staff on them, then there may be other ways we have to promote in order to get those qualifications, that experience into people. Because quite clearly, with an increase in housing, because we're going to be building more, whatever happens, we're actually going to need more housing managers, not less.
Okay, all right. I'm just conscious of time. Actually,
can I just pick up on a couple of points on that one, Stuart? Though,
just very quickly then, Paul, if you could.
A couple of things. I think the issue for CIH is value and relevance. I think the issue for me would be having varying methods. So a lot of things can be done through the web. I think customising the service to suit individuals, because dealing with organisations as customers, and certainly this alliance structure is allowing people to make sure that people and organisations can shape what works for them and what they need. And I think that's the bit where the CIH needs to personalise its offer and engage more directly and customise it to suit the individual member as well as the individual organisations. And for me, that's a massive opportunity.
Okay, no, that's fine. Listen, I'm conscious of time, both. Thank you very much for that. Voting closes on the 30th of January, so on Monday, so still time to get your votes in. So thank you both of our speakers, and I hope people found that useful. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.